Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Want to welcome everybody to the second installment of Wisdom Wednesday. Actually, I think this might be the third one, but who's counting? Um, anyway, this is a new segment that we started up a few weeks ago, and essentially wanted to, provide a segment that would essentially answer some of the questions that had things to do outside of just particular bowling balls or releases or things along those lines. So, I want to provide as much insight as I can from the coaching aspect to make everybody out there and all the players that follow along our videos to be the best version of themselves that they can be. So, I asked last week and I said, hey, gang, I want to review what the fans of the show want to hear about. And it was pretty adamant from a few people that they really wanted to learn a little bit more. We had some ideas about, how to read lane graphs and, how do I get lined up or things along those lines. But one of them that kind of stuck out to me the most that I thought was important was something that we call transition or lane transition, if you will. Um, it's kind of a convoluted topic, and it is quite different depending on the environment that you're actually bowling in. And what I mean by environment, it could be league play, it could be the type of condition you're bowling on, it could be the pattern you're bowling on or the house that you're in, and or the individuals that are on the pair with you. They all come into play. So, what I thought would be a really good way of kind of attacking this is to first kind of give a little bit of an understanding of what transition truly is. Okay. And it's probably one of the hardest things in the game to be able to fully visualize and see it when it's happening. And a lot of players will see it, but the next part is the hard part. And that is, what do I do? Okay. What do I do? The lanes are transitioning. What is my next step? Do I got to go in? Do I got to make a ball change? Do I got to move my feet? Um, you know, the answer to it isn't as easy as you would think. It isn't a simple, yes, if you're throwing this ball, you're going to go to this ball. Because the environment that you're bowling in plays such a huge part of how transition is different from center to center, pattern to pattern, format to format. And the individuals who are really good at realizing the transition and understanding what they're seeing are the ones that will end up having the best luck when it comes to making an educated guess. Because, gang, at the end of the day, you are making an educated guess with as much knowledge as you can to attack the lanes and to put the proper piece or the proper positioning of your feet in play. So where I thought I'd get started at is to kind of go over something that has to do with bowling balls first. That way, it kind of ties in a little bit about the topic in general. As I'm going through these, by all means, I will be monitoring the comments section. So, I know there's a bunch of you that are jumping into the room right now. You can stop by, you can say your hellos, you can put questions up. If you want me to re-review something, or you have something that comes to mind when I'm talking through it, just put it up on the screen. I will catch it. I will try to get to each and every one of them before I end the feed. So, first and foremost, let's start with the league environment. Okay. Primarily, I know there's a lot of tournament players that stop by and look at this, but what I'm going to go over is quite different from league play as it is to essentially probably going to a tournament and how the transitions are going to work there. So, but when all of us are bowling league for the most part, whether you're from my home state of Pennsylvania or you're bowling across the states, generally your league pattern is going to be some of your softest conditions, if you will. And by soft, I mean there is a lot of blend in the lane patterns that allow for poor shots to end up being okay in terms of hitting the pocket or carrying or essentially not exposing a poorly thrown shot. All right. So transition is quite different when you're in league environment. A lot of league patterns they're going to have what's referred to as a higher ratio pattern. And really, not to get too hung up on it, but essentially all it means is that the concentration of oil in the middle is much more vast than the concentration of oil on the outside of the pattern. So if you hear somebody saying 15 to 1 or, God, I hope not 20 to 1 and above, it just means there's 15 times the amount of oil in the center of the lane as there is towards the outsides. All right. And then these oil patterns have shape. Okay. So the machine, when they're applying it, they're putting shape forward and back. And depending on when the drop brush and how it's applied, it makes the pattern easier or harder. Okay. So you've heard people use the term like these are super cliffed. And what they mean by that is that there seems to be a huge oil line in the center, and then bang, it's all dry to the outside. So they feel like they got to kind of throw the ball out the window to get it to actually read the lane. All right. Now, the reason I bring this up and why it's so different is that your transitional moves in that type of environment where you have a lot of concentrated oil in the middle part of the lane, and most of the time to your left, is a lot different than if you're bowling on something, let's say, that is a lower ratio tournament pattern or a flatter pattern that doesn't have the concentration of oil or help or blend to it through the lane. And here's where I'm going with that. In a typical league night, let's say that you have yourself lined up. You're throwing your favorite ball. And just for to kind of give a visualization, let's say you're sliding into 20, okay, and you're targeting, you're kind of playing the track or between first and second arrow, and you essentially are throwing shots, you're hitting the pocket. All of a sudden, as you're going on, the bowling ball seems to be hooking more and more down lane, okay, because again, you have a lot of free hook to your right, and you have the oil line to your left, okay. When you identify that in a league environment, a lot of times the transitional moves are going to be a lot easier to attack, right? Because in a league environment, as you move your feet as a right-hander to the left or a left-hander moving your feet to the right, you're going to be moving into where there's a much higher concentration of oil, okay? And essentially, your transitional moves can be with the same bowling ball a lot of times, by simply moving a couple boards to the left and feeding the ball to the dry of the lane again. Because with the oil being to your left and being more concentrated at its highest point in the middle of the lane, that oil that you're moving into is allowing that bowling ball to feed through the front of the lane just as easy. And then it's utilizing down lane motion more than not, where it's going to take the bowling ball through the pins. Okay. It happens pretty frequently that they're small moves, and I know a lot of us will, probably get through most of our league nights on one ball. Sometimes, we'll try to maybe make more changes in a league environment, maybe more to make the bowling ball look a little better through the pins, but not necessarily that we're having a lot of trouble getting the bowling ball to the pocket. Okay, so you got to think about the transition in that environment, though. All right, and that's why I want to kind of have twofold here. In a league environment, whether you're bowling, let's say, 3 in a team, 4 in a team, or 5 on a team, your transition or your moves are going to be a little slower or a little quicker depending on the amount of people on the lane. On top of a lot of people on the lane, where the individuals you're bowling with are throwing the ball and what types of bowling balls they are throwing. Okay. And I think there was if anybody watches a lot of bowling videos, I thought it was pretty cool because today, John Janowitz from Kegel, started a series they're releasing on, lane graphs and lane play and things along those lines. And he made a really good comment on there as he was trying to explain to everybody about how he kind of gets lined up and what zone he's going to kind of try to play, after practice. And he made a really good point when it came to the bowling balls being used. He had warmed up with a purple hammer, okay, a urethane bowling ball that looked pretty darn good. He struck all 5 shots on a pretty blended pattern to the right. He threw a Web Tour, and then he threw, I think it was an Idol Pearl or something from Roto. And he was moving around the lane and kind of showing how he was getting lined up and understanding. But what he was pointing to was he was already thinking ahead about transition and thinking ahead about the amount of people that were on the lane and what it's going to do to the bowling lane itself. All right. Um, and what he ultimately said was, if he was in a team environment, even though that purple hammer struck quite a bit, he knew himself having to bowl 3 games on the same pair that a purple hammer wasn't going to probably be a very good suggestion, even though it looked pretty good early, because he knows what that bowling ball is going to do to the lane and what it's going to do to his teammates, essentially. And that when he makes a move, a transitional move, that bowling ball is not going to look real good when he has to move off it. Now, in relationship, if he was bowling a singles event where he was going to move from this lane and move into the next lane and move into the next lane, and knowing he's not going to be spending the whole time on one lane, he probably would have started with it because he knows that area of the lane isn't going to get tight quite as fast. All right. And it's very important to understand that. So before I talk about anything on the tournament side, I want to talk about how the balls come into play. So we talked a little bit right there, and as I was explaining about a urethane covered bowling ball. Bowling is not the same as it was years ago, folks. Okay, so I show my age a little bit. I'm 42. I'm going to be 43 this year. So I grew up in an era where urethane was very prevalent, and then switching over to reactive resin bowling balls and kind of changing the way you bowl. Okay, years ago we played a lot of down lane motion, and as the game evolved and the bowling balls got stronger and things along those lines, we started to play the fronts of the lane a little bit more. And that doesn't change. Okay. So a urethane ball, you got to think about it. So you have that invisible item on the lane, the oil, right? So on a urethane covered bowling ball, a urethane ball does not absorb oil. All right. So when your ball comes back, you see for the most part, a very thick line of oil on the outer shell of the ball. And when you talk about flare, you'll have a pretty nice tight flare mark on that ball. That bowling ball does not flare, meaning the axis of the bowling ball is not migrating as it goes down the lane. And I'll explain that in a different manner. Okay. But what that's doing, if you think about it on urethane ball, is it's picking that oil up off the front part of the lane and it is depositing it down lane. So if you heard our parents or grandparents or other people say carry down, that was a big term back in the day. Carry down was a very real thing. It's a very real thing today when you're talking about urethane bowling balls. However, when you're talking about reactive resin bowling balls and bowling balls that have higher flare potential, and by flare potential, what I'm saying, when you're looking at a bowling ball and you see that there's multiple oil tracks, okay, going down the lane, what you're actually seeing there, so everybody understands, is each time that bowling ball rotates around, the next time it rotates around, it's putting another oil track. What's happening is your axis point or axis migration is happening, is that bowling ball is searching for basically a fresh surface to help it to turn over itself. Okay. But these bowling balls are designed to absorb oil. So what they're really doing is that they're taking that oil off the front of the lane at a very rapid pace. Right. They're kind of soaking it into the bowling ball for the most part, and it's not carrying it down lane like you would think with a traditional urethane ball. But what it does is affects the middle part of the lane a little bit more. So you may have heard some pros talking about the speed bump or things along those lines. And when I get into the tournament side of it, I'm really going to explain what they're talking about. But what you're seeing is these really strong bowling balls, they're not really affecting on your league pattern what you see down lane. What you're seeing happen is it's really making the front portion of the lane hook more. So it makes it harder and harder to stay in the same zone and simply ball down on your bowling ball. A lot of times when we're in league play now, and if a lot of people are outside to the right playing with a really strong bowling ball, it's going to force everybody to get in. Okay. And individuals that have less hand, are not as heavy handed, they're going to start suffering carry. They're going to be searching for ball motion, because what they're feeling is the lane is not getting tighter. What's actually happening is the front of the lane is hooking more. Because when we talk about physics, gang, a bowling ball can only change direction if it slows down. All right. And that's where friction comes into play. So think about it this way. If your bowling ball is trying to hook as soon as it hits the lane and it's so strong and it's taking that oil off the lane and absorbing into the ball, the front of the lane starting to hook will make the down lane feel a little tighter and it won't allow your bowling ball to go through it. Okay. That's the difference of what transition feels like today, and being able to identify, is it really hooking more or am I losing the front part of the lane? Okay. That is the hardest thing to understand when it comes to ball motion and understand what your bowling ball is trying to tell you. All right. So again, a lot of the individuals watching this, if we're talking about just the league side of it here, your transitional moves are going to be smaller. They're going to be moves to the left. But when you start to see, watch your bowling ball. All right. If your bowling ball seems like it's revving up really hard in the front of the lane and then it's bailing out on you down lane, your bowling ball that you're throwing is too strong for the time. Okay. Because that bowling ball, when friction is trying to actually get it out of the skid phase faster and really get in that hook phase, when it goes to roll forward, that bowling ball is done. And you get that blah, that flat 10 or flat 7 if you're bowling from the other side of the lane. A lot of times what you're seeing there is that the bowling ball you're throwing is too strong. And what it's trying to tell you is you need to throw a bowling ball that is going to get through the front of the lane. And I'm not saying it has to be a pearl gang. All I'm saying is you're going to go to a bowling ball that has less flare potential, so it is more stable going through the front part of the lane. Hopefully that part makes sense. I have a lot of comments coming in, so I'm going to read a couple of these just to make sure I'm not missing any key points and skipping right over them. But Chad, don't have the time right now to watch the whole show, but I want to let you know how much the knowledge and information you share in these sessions has really helped my game. Jeff, you're the best. Thank you. Thanks, Chad. I appreciate the words. Carrie, I know you're bowling league tonight. What can one do when someone you are bowling against decides to play defense when they're breaking a lane pattern down in practice? Carrie, I'll go over that in the tournament side. And I'll speak very honest about it because I know why you're asking that, because I pointed out that it was happening this past weekend to you guys. But Raymond Benjamin, I hear professionals talk about the track. Can explain where on the lane the track is, when they're basically talking about the track. Track area, think second arrow, somewhere in between 1 and 3. The track can be so wide for certain players, but I mean, when they're playing the track of the lane, they're playing, they're talking about playing somewhere along, 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that realm. Fred, Raymond, most track area in the lanes are around first or second arrow. Kind of said the same thing. How do you read the lane oil on the lanes? Phil, the best way for me to explain that is how you, I don't know if you're asking how you read the lane graph or how you know what's on the lane. And I think they're two distinctly different things. It's okay to be educated to be able to read a lane graph, but it's a lot better to go out and throw your bowling ball. And when you're practicing to understand what the lane is telling you. So one thing, and again, I'll say it because JJ went over the same thing, which I thought was really cool because it's something I preach all the time, is when you're trying to figure a lane out. Let's say you're going to, nationals, or you're going to team trials or something where they don't announce the patterns till right when you get there. Essentially, how I figure out a lane panel and what the lane wants, I do that in practice. Okay. And here's how. I'm going to take a bowling ball that is what I refer to as a control piece. All right. Something I have a lot of faith in, something I know that's pretty smooth. And when I'm warming up, I'm going to try to figure out in zones where my bowling ball is seeing the lane. So when I teach clients, essentially, I may have you put your feet on 10 and throw a ball to 5 and watch where it shapes. You're going to throw 1 or 2 shots that way. And then I'm going to take a 5-board move with my feet. I'm going to stand on 15. I'm going to roll the ball through 10. And I'm going to watch where it shapes front to back, left to right. I'm going to move 5 more, and I'm going to look where it shapes front to back and left to right. All right. Because what I'm trying to figure out there is where is the oil to my left? okay, or the hold. Some people refer to it as shim, you may hear people say, and where the hook is to my right, okay? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how skilled of a player you are. We need to have we need to have a little bit of leniency when we're bowling. Even on the hardest of patterns, we want to put ourselves in a position to maximize the marginal shots, because the marginal shots hitting the pocket can yield X, Y, and Z. Okay. We need to try and be as efficient as possible. So, when we're trying to figure out where the lane wants us to play and what type of ball, you can do that in practice by moving your feet in specific zones, watching where the ball shapes, okay, where it shapes from each one of those areas, because you're going to see very quickly if you need to be throwing a bowling ball that you need to see the lane a little closer to you at the foul line, or you need to see something that actually sees it a little further down lane. Now, when you're doing that as well, you want to make sure that you're understanding and watching your bowling ball go through the pins too, because again, if you're in a zone and you're hitting the pocket, but maybe a firm shot or a shot that a little left is on your hand, maybe 2 10s or really flat tens or something, that tells you pretty quickly that you're probably a little too far left, or that you're not throwing quite enough bowling ball. All right. And again, they're invisible things. You can't, it's the best educated guess you can have. But if you start practicing in that manner, you will quickly understand from that get-go, what is the starting point of my bag? That way you can understand what the transitioning ball would be. Okay. Mr. Anderson, Rocky, I have to say on here, I think the picture you put of Devin today was the first time I ever seen her not smiling. So I don't know if you were being mean. I'm going to go with she was just being her age finally. But first time I ever saw her not smiling. But she's such a cutie. It's unbelievable. All right. What else we got here? All right. Brandon, the track is usually around second arrow or 10 board. Most bowlers, so the older lanes, the more defined the track, most of the time will have more hooking area, which is correct. And understanding your transition, like I said, there's so much more to it, and I'm going to add to it as I talk about the tournament side of it a little bit, because for league, you're walking into the building, and most times you're going to be bowling on the same pattern you bowled on the week before. You're going to be. It's very odd that you're going to have a different lane conditioner used, different machine. Obviously, the surface, unless they get new panels that week, isn't going to change. So you have a lot of commonality that stays the same week to week in your league environment. Now, who you bowl against and what bowling balls they're throwing and stuff like that obviously affect it. And you need to pay attention to what they're using, because the bowling balls that the individuals are using against you or on your team are essentially changing that invisible oil that's on the lane and making the transitions differently. Okay. But at the end of the day, you're going to be on that pair. And in practice, let's say you have the one lane hooking more than the other one, or one lane is earlier than the other one, then you go with that. So when you make the transitional moves, you know what you're going to do from lane to lane. And you heard me say this before in a lot of the other program, and it's a huge wisdom thing, is even in your own bowling center, journal. Okay. Have a journal, because you should know when you go to a particular lane in your bowling center, the characteristics of that lane. Because I can tell you, every one of us can tell, oh, 1 and 2 sucks. It's an end pair. It hooks out of the building. Or, lane 17 is always tighter. That's great. Okay. But understand why and understand what zone you were thrown in. Because when you go there and do it again, it's probably going to do the same thing, no matter what pattern they put down. Always journal. Okay. What do we got here? Ryan Snyder. How to tell when your ball is revving quickly, especially with solid colored bowling balls. I want to make sure I understand your question, Ryan. When it's revving quickly, or do you mean is how to tell if your ball is burning up? I'm not sure if that's where you're going at with that. Solid color bowling balls, I will tell you, some people see them differently. Some people like the phasing and the colorful stuff. Solid color bowling balls, if you're having a hard time picking up on them, I would just recommend putting in a different color insert so you can pick the grips up. Slug, anything along those lines, something's going to pop. But if you could, basically, if you're going to tell if your bowling ball is revving too quickly, if that's what you're asking for, or it's seeing the front part of the lane too much, is that you're going to probably feel very quickly that your bowling ball feels like it's giving up through the pins. So watch your bowling ball. If your bowling ball is too early and it's not going through the pins correctly, you're probably going to see that bowling ball take when it starts to roll forward at the end of the pattern, and it kind of stops and it exits the pin deck going away from the 8 pin, so headed towards the 9. If you see deflection or that ball isn't continuing through the pins, it's probably telling you that your bowling ball is essentially, you could call it rolling out, but it may be reading the front too much. Do bowlers go professional from league bowling? Sure, Philip. I mean, obviously, everybody's got to start somewhere. Um, you know, professional bowlers are just like everybody else. I mean, we bowl league. We grew up with the game. We work hard at it. I think the biggest difference when we talk about, what separates professionals is really truly being students of the game, just like any other sport, where you put in, you get out what you put in, right? I bowl some, pro stops and stuff, but even for myself, I'm not the caliber player that these guys out there are. They're sharper, but takes a lot of work. All right, Aaron, when you change to a weaker ball, are you also typically suggesting a weaker layout also? No, I'm not, Aaron. And the reason I say no is, if you've caught any of the other programs and stuff, I'm one for sure. I like to have my benchmark layout on essentially the bowling balls and let the bowling balls dictate my progressions a little bit and my transitions. So again, when we talk about transition, since I have very similar layouts on my bowling balls, like my favorite pin up or pin down layouts, it makes it a lot easier for me to transition to the next ball out from the way that the manufacturer intended it to fit in the line. Okay, so for myself, bowling for hammer, I can understand if I'm looking at, front to back movements. Let's take, for instance, the redemption line. Okay, very successful line. When my redemption solid was becoming too early, okay, and I wanted it to go a little further to stay in that zone as it transitions, there's that word again, I might go into the hybrid because it has the same core and my layout's the same. And now all I really did is I took the texture of the bowling ball changed, which is what comes in contact with the lane, right? That's what comes into contact with the lane oil. And then if that ball became maybe a little early, or the front of the lane was going away and it's transitioning more, and I wanted to get that kind of that same look, I'm staying in the same layout. And I might have been going into my redemption pearl later in the day. And all I was doing with that texture change and the cover stock on the outside was I was essentially balling. It's not even essentially balling down. I was controlling my front to back movements with the surface of my ball. Solid or matte color, matte finish, sorry. Went into hybrid, which is a blend between the two. And then I went into pearl to end it off. And there's not a cutoff. It's not game 1 this, game 2 that, game 3 this. But what it does is, because those layouts were similar, I was able to make my transitions easier. All right. Let's say I went from a strong layout on a middle of the range ball, and then I was going to step down into a weak ball, but that weak ball, I had a super weak layout in it. I'm stepping down even more, right? And so the bowling ball is not going to shape the same way. It's not just going to slow down a little bit more. It's going to completely change it, which makes that transition even harder. So again, big proponent on not getting too muddied up and too many layouts in the bag. I'm just not a big fan of that. All right, Brandon, it's a good start. Symmetrical core ball with a solid cover stock, medium flare, gets down the lane. So yeah, similar to what I was saying, he was kind of reiterating that. And it's the same thing. It's a control piece, it's a way to read the lane. The core, when you're getting lined up, and what Brandon means by that symmetrical core is he's not utilizing a ball to get lined up that has a big asymmetrical core that's essentially going to help turn that ball over its axis and get that axis to start migrating even more and that flare potential up. I'm not really learning a lot. I want to learn what the lane is actually doing. So I'm going to use a control ball symmetric most times, so I can get a very good read on what the lane's going to do. And then if I need that asymmetry of that big ball, that bigger motor, something to, really topple the lane, then I know that's what I'm going to go to at the end of the practice. All right. What's more effective? Utilize the dots, arrows, or images on the back of the boards for your mark. Same pattern every week, but it's not going to be the same. They're always a little different. Sure, they're a little different, Lucky, but for the same thing, like, in league, I will tell you, obviously I bowled league for years and years and years, and I agree that each week can be a little different, but the characteristics don't change that much. You may throw a different bowling ball. The ambient temp in the building may affect it a little. Again, there's so many things that can affect lane oil. When they've dressed it, how long it sat before you got to go on it, were the lights on in the building at that point. There's a million variables, but at the same time, the actual shape of the pattern doesn't change that much. And to answer your question, Lonnie, dots, arrows, images, backboards, your mark, there's no right or wrong way of how you target and how you use the lane and how you essentially hit your mark. A lot of us, once you're doing it for a long period of time, you can effectively change your ball roll by where you look at. So, like, for myself, to be honest with you, I'd primarily look past the arrows. I draw in imaginary lines. I bring them back to the arrows. That's where my eyes are fixated as I'm going to the line. And my natural release, once I'm fixated on that and I get into my pivot set, my eyes go straight down. And then I actually can see my ball rolling through what I wanted to hit. It's just a visualization. But, if I want to make delay the bowling ball a little bit, I may move my eyes down a little further. If I want to bring it closer to me, I can move my eyes in. There's no one way you should do it. What I can tell you is once you find one that effectively works for you, stick to that and refine it, because how you see the lane is important to be able to repeat what you want to do. How do you combat carry down? It wasn't really asked on there, Troy, but again, to answer your question a little bit, and we're talking about league play, what you're seeing isn't really carry down. Unless you're surrounded by a bunch of guys in league that are throwing urethane, it's not carry down you're seeing. It is actually the front of the lane hooking more. And I think it's harder sometimes, and it feels that way because when you try to play to the right on these high ratio patterns that are super flooded in the middle, and the outsides are what I refer to as dirt. It's hard to just stand on top of it and play to the right. So you're forced to kind of move in, and you got to use some of that oil to help project your ball down the lane. Well, as you move in and these big bowling balls are scooping up the oil from the front part of the lane and soaking it in, now the front part of the lane is hooking. So your ball's trying to, it's trying to grab the lane earlier. And essentially what happens is that it makes the lane feel tighter down lane. It's not really tighter down lane. It's that the front is hooking. And I'm going to talk about that, I promise, in 2 seconds here, because we're going to go over to the tournament side of it, because I want to explain some differences. It's more prevalent on the tournament scene because that part of the lane gets torn up even faster. So it's absolutely crazy. But how do you combat it? Really, it's getting to the sweet spot and understanding, having the right piece in your hand at that point, Troy, if you want to stay in that particular zone. It can be challenging too. I mean, I will tell you, like, on the super overcliffed house conditions, to me, sometimes it's even harder, seems harder to bowl if you really work at being super accurate, because, when you're bowling in tournament conditions and you're bowling on patterns that are flatter, and there's a bigger premium on making better shots and having tighter angles in the front most time. When you get onto these house patterns and try to keep your angles in front of you, you end up leaving buckets when you move in, or 2 8-10s, and you're like, what just happened? I feel like I got to kind of throw it to the spot. That could be challenging too. But when you're comparing that, I would say, if you feel like they're tightening up down lane, Troy, you're probably in a situation, especially with your rev rate, that you really need to go to a bowling ball that's a little smoother, maybe your hybrid in the lead condition, or Pearl, and just get as much retention saved up for down lane as possible. What else do we have? 900 Global Zen, Ordnance C4, and After Dark. Do they roll excellent down the lane, and do they read quickly in any other bowling balls? Those are all very different balls, Philip. Different from one another. Kind of you have a pretty good array of different shapes there. So you have some progressions. Obviously, your Zen is a big asymmetrical piece. That Ordnance is a solid, and then the After Dark is a smoother piece. So you got 3 distinctly different shapes to work with there. All right, Raymond, what causes a lane to tighten up after one game in a 5-man league with all bowlers using the same equipment, total of 10 bowlers? Occasionally the lanesville all of a sudden tighten up and you have to move right. Curious to why this does happen. Again, Raymond, I think I just kind of went over that, and I think what you guys are feeling there is, I don't know what type of equipment you're using, but it does come into play. What you're seeing there on that transition is the front of the lane is hooking more. It is not tightening up down lane. Okay, the body of the lane could be a little bit, because even these the asymmetric ball, or the resin bowling balls that are soaking the oil in, they are taking it up off the lane, and with that maximum flare potential, some of it's depositive in the middle. But I don't know, your house pattern there. I want to say maybe you bowl at Crystal, and I've heard some stories there in that 5-man league. If I'm thinking of the right person here, I tried to help out with some of the blend in that building, if you will. It could be the shape of the pattern as well. I don't know where the cutoff is, how many loads are in certain areas, but that comes into play. I mean, gang, I could talk for hours and hours and hours about how the oil is applied to the lanes as well, and what that means, and the shape of your pattern comes into big play. It really depends where the taper of the pattern is. It's huge. Del Picard, what's up, my man? I think you were drilling some bowling balls tonight. 5.5-inch pin to pap layout for that. I don't know which part you were saying that to, Del. I might have lost my place there. So, yep, Crystal Lanes. I was right. I thought I had the name, but yeah, Raymond, it's tough. I mean, lane surface, I think, comes into play a lot there. Lane to lane topography is definitely a challenge from the sounds of it, and just the overall shape. Honestly, guys, we can make puddle in the middle, dirt right. I kind of thought that's where you're going with it. I laugh at the 5.5 pin to pap for the puddle, Del, because I'm 5.25 on almost every one of my favorite layouts to begin with. Heavy-handed, but I don't like throwing it to the right very quickly. It's just not fun. Worked so many years to try to not do that, so to force myself to do it in league is not very desirable. But I actually go the other way to give you an idea, Del. Like in the dirt, when I'm playing in the dirt and stuff, I'll use a lot of like 2-inch pins on really, really strong bowling balls to get them to freeze. One that's been pretty money lately on the house conditions and not having to transition much and not having to move my feet a lot is a super strong bowling ball with a short pin, basically to get that thing to smooth out, stabilize, and that thing just hits like a freaking train. But anyway, so we talked a lot about transition with, 5 persons, same center. It seems like there's so much to go over, but the biggest flash is is it different when you essentially go into a tournament atmosphere? It absolutely is. The lane patterns and the things that we're bowling on and are approaching in today's day and age, especially these lower ratio patterns, completely changes the way lanes transition. Okay. So a lot of times, let's say you're going to go out and you're going to bowl, maybe a local tournament. I don't mean this has to be PBA or anything like that. A local tournament, let's just say that there's a ratio where it's, 4-1, 5-1, getting a little harder. Doesn't have a lot of shape to the pattern. And somebody says, well, how do I handle the transitions there? Well, what you're going to get there is your transitions are going to happen even faster. And when you transition or you make moves, those moves could be even more vast as you're trying to understand what the lane is doing. All right. So when you're in those patterns that are lower ratio and they don't have shape to help the bowling ball get down the lane, um, you're forced to basically do a lot more with the surface of the bowling ball and really truly understanding the front to back movements as you're attacking the lane. All right. You don't have that free puddle of oil in the middle that as the lane's, slowly breaking down, you don't have the ability a lot to just make a small little move. Okay. The moves are much, much bigger. All right. The difference is that when you move on a house pattern, for instance, you know that there's probably going to be a higher concentration in every one of those houses of oil in the middle. So the lane's automatically going to see more oil and it's going to be fresher. It's going to help the ball scoot. Okay. It's going to help the ball. When you are bowling on these lower ratio patterns or patterns that are flatter through the middle, meaning there's no shape. Okay. There's no taper like the Christmas tree pattern you would see on a house shot, right? When you make a move, let's say that's just try to parallel move, the bowling ball is not going to automatically on its own scoot and push this way on its own. Okay. You're not moving into the oil. So the transitions there are completely different than what you're doing in league. Okay. And the front part of the lane in those environments is what we refer to sometimes can make it feel like a speed bump. All right. So a lot of times when you're bowling in these tournament settings now that are flatter and they're trying to make them hard, the pattern doesn't have a lot of shape, but what it has is a ton of oil on the lane in general. Okay. So spread out even further. All right. So what do you think happens at the majority of these tournaments when there is just a very high volume of oil with not a lot of shape and it's applied mainly to the front part of the lane? What do you got out there? Guess what do you think is the first thing that most players do? And I'm talking about players you bowl with in a league environment all the way up to the best players in the world. What do you got out there? Raymond, I'll explain what I mean by front to back. What really happens out there is that more often than not, you got it. Ryan Snyder said it. Surface. Okay. So many times, and I see this all the time. They will go in there and people are just crowbarring a bowling ball with surface, right? Because what they're essentially trying to do is they're trying to get their ball to essentially see it, okay, a little bit on the fresh, and to make it as slow and as controlled as possible. Because in case everybody isn't aware, putting a ton of surface in your bowling ball does not make a bowling ball hook more, okay? It makes the bowling ball essentially get out of the skid phase earlier and it sees the lane sooner. So, Raymond, what I'm talking about with that front to back movement, okay, and bringing it closer to us, the more surface I put on a ball and I'm hitting it, right? The closer to the foul line, that bowling ball is going to try to read the lane because, again, it is friction, okay? The friction's in our hand, all right? And that friction's coming into contact with the oil. And if you make it duller, it's going to try to grab that lane as soon as it hits. Okay. So when we talked about from the league environment, it's tenfold harder in the tournament environment because we're using a lot more surface there. Which again, if you're using more surface, there's a lot of oil in the front. As it starts to take it off the front, where do you think it feels tight? Down lane. Okay. So the more surface we use, the more it is going to be prone to make the lane feel tighter down lane, which makes the transitions harder, right? Because what do? The front part of the lane is hooking more. There's almost only so many things I can do to trick my hand. And you could think, okay, well, the front of the lane's hooking, so I need to go with a smoother ball, right? All right. So the guy picks up and he gets, I'm going to throw a pearl now. I'm going to throw a pearl because the front's hooking. All right. He throws a pearl. Looks really nice going through it. Got through that zone in the front part of the lane. Hit the speed bump. There's the word, the speed bump. What happened? What are you talking about? What do you mean speed bump? All right. Well, the front of the lane's hooking, and the bowling balls were so big. All right. The speed bump, because there's no buff and there's no shape in that middle portion, the speed bump is the portion of the lane towards the middle where that oil hasn't really been manipulated too much, other than it stripped it off the front with these high flaring balls, kind of put it in the middle, got a speed bump, and then I can't get my bowling ball to slow down lane. Okay. So it almost makes it feel like the bowling ball wants to go slower through the front, accelerate through the middle of the lane, and then it never wants to slow down. So when you went to use that pearl bowling ball, that thing felt like it went 60 feet. And you throw your hands in the air and go, well, what do I do? The trick is essentially to understand the portion of the lane you need to be in. And I know this is about transition, but it's important to understand the difference there, okay? The transition in that, in today's day and age in the tournament play, is more coming down to the manipulation of the hand, speed, and rev rate, okay? When you make the transitional moves in that type of environment, a lot of times your moves and your transitions are not going to be the small little parallel moves. What they're going to be is you have to actually start to play that hook in the front part of the lane with a ball, okay, to move left, and then you will actually create hold with your angle. So your angle going through the front of the lane is allowing the bowling ball to see it, okay, to use that hook in the front, and then to not give away the head pin as much to the right. Okay, so essentially, if you hear somebody talking about playing the front part of the lane, that's what they're doing. So when you transition in that environment, you may not be using quite as much surface, but what you are going to find out is your moves that are going left are going to be quicker, and you're going to be trying to play hitting spots in the front part of the lane more often than not. Now, here's the question you're probably all wondering. Why are these guys and so many of them using a urethane bowling ball when that happens? Anybody know the answer to that one? I like the little ad lib that goes, back and forth and kind of challenging everybody to kind of talk through it a little bit. But the reason that they use urethane bowling balls so often and why they're so prevalent right now is a urethane bowling ball is designed to hook where? Early. Okay. Urethane bowling ball hooks early. A urethane bowling ball does not go down lane and turn the corner. That's not what the intention is. Urethane ball hooks early, and it is meant to help play the front part of the lane. Okay. That's how we bowled, right? That's why it's so prevalent. That's why it's used in so many pattern lengths. It's used to control the front part of the lane because you're not going to have to make as drastic of moves, and you can stay in zones for longer. All right. Again, when I essentially tell you that is when you're making transitional moves in tournament play, it's the best educated guess that you can make. Again, I'm going to go back to the layouts of your bowling balls. All right. If you have, 20 different layouts on your arsenal, all right, and you're trying to go from ball to ball to ball and make moves based on where that bowling ball is supposed to fit in your line, and the layouts are all over the place, you're going to make those transitional moves at that level even harder. You're going to make them almost impossible on yourself. You need to understand and have faith and understand your bag for your transitional moves because those are your tools. All right. When you're in a tournament play and in that type of environment, especially if you're going to move lane to lane to lane, you also need to be very conscious of the individuals you're bowling with and the individuals you're following, because it's going to affect how the next lane you go to plays. All right. To give an example, this past weekend, we bowled on a 39-foot pattern and in a pretty high friction center. And it was, that kind of, I don't want to say it was multi angles of attack. You had to kind of play them to the right a little bit, but there's a little bit of everything going down the lane. But you could definitely tell the pairs with the guys or gals that, played the first game or first two games with urethane, because as people hit those pairs later in the block, how they were playing the lanes was affected a lot more drastically than the pairs they moved to where people were not using urethane in front of them. For myself, I use it as a tool. Okay, if I'm going from lane to lane, I used it for about just shy of 2 games and got off it pretty quickly. But, there's others that stand it the whole time. But again, when you're moving pair to pair to pair, transitions are even harder because you have to pay attention to what the people in front of you are doing, what the lanes in front of you are doing. Go back to that journaling thing I was talking about, because you essentially need to know if you've hit that lane in the past. Maybe you, in practice day, you notice something that was constant to that lane. That's what gives you a competitive advantage when you go to it. Understand and listen to what your ball and what the other individual's balls in front of you are telling. If you're the second individual that's, going up for the block, for instance, and you're not the first one that has to make the shot each game, you should really be paying attention to what that person did in front of you. Okay, whether they're playing the exact same line you are, watch what their bowling ball does going down the lane, and you will learn from it. You see it all the time, and why. Like, for instance, at the PBA level, each play, if it's a multi-block event, you won't ever be the person that is starting every time, because they change it for that very reason, because you can't always be the guinea pig. You need to essentially, watch and learn from what the person's doing. And I guarantee you, the individual on your pair is kind of relying on you to be the guinea pig when it's your turn to go first, to kind of show them the pathway for what the lane is doing. All right. Raymond, yep. Yeah, Philip, my advice, always watch where everyone is playing the lane. That's correct. Practice with all your bowling balls to see where they fit in your arsenal. Those are also correct as well. There's so many bowling balls that are out in the market. But again, I'll touch upon it one more time. I'm not a huge, I will tell you right off the bat, I don't think I have a single bowling ball in my bag that has polish on it. I'd be shocked if I have anything that really has compound on it either. I really like to keep it vanilla when it comes to layouts that aesthetically match my eye. And I like for the manufacturer to do the job of where these bowling balls fit, because it makes it a lot easier when you're doing transition and trying to stay in a part of the lane. If you have a part of the lane that looks really good, you want to try to stay in that as long as it allows you to. And you can do so utilizing your tools, or, as a player, the little changes and manipulations you can do with your hand, to kind of trick it a little bit. But those are all competitive advantages. But I guess my news flash at the end, gang, is that there's no secret mathematical formula or anything that can totally make you understand the exact transition every time something happens. You've got to really take the time to watch what the lane is trying to tell you. The pins you're leaving up is a big tall tale. Understanding the difference between if you're ring tenning, flat tenning, plaque tenning, depending on where you're from. How often your ball is going super high flush. If you've gone super high flush 4 or 5 straight shots, I don't know about y'all, but I'm usually starting to scoot the feet a little bit, because what I don't want is the hello big 4 when the lane starts to transition and I didn't get the memo. The memo was happening the last 4 to 5 frames before that, where my ball was split in the 8-9, and I just continued to set up camp there and not, see that we had to make a move. Look at the telecast. Hopefully everybody follows along and they watch the the PBA, and if you have Bowl TV, the PWBA. But the PBA, I mean, whether you like it or not, I think it's kind of cool that they use the blue oil on TV. You can kind of see as the lanes are changing. You can see how launch angles change. You can see how thick the ribbon gets from them beating up that portion of the lane, and you can see pretty quickly, the invisible stuff that you can now see, what it does to essentially kind of call out when a shot is poor, you can see it going through the lane differently, or the path or the progression that it goes through, and see them changing even quicker. So, pay attention to those things when you're going, you're watching the telecast and rooting on your favorite players, because there's a lot of really good things that they're doing to kind of try to educate, sometimes with not a lot of talk about it, but what you're actually seeing, you can learn a lot from it. I'm going to scroll back through real quick again, make sure I didn't really miss anything here, but it's a hard one to kind of go over in full detail. The gambit. We could talk to hours about lane play and changing strategies and how the lanes break down. But again, you really got to listen to what the bowling ball is telling you. And go from there. I think it's huge to the betterment of yourself. And again, it's going to make you a better player when you really start to listen to your surroundings. And I know that's a hard thing. Watch, listen, have that perspective to understand what you're seeing, because if you're not paying attention to it, that's when you're going to go backwards, because you were being told what's happening, but you weren't listening. It happens in every aspect of life. All right. So what do we got here? Raymond, appreciate what you're doing, and your advice is knowledgeable. Not everyone has professional advice, and I am one of those. Ryan Schaefer's impeccable advice and his knowledge, and I thank you both. Absolutely. Ryan is definitely a person who understands transition, understands the game at a higher level. He probably uses a different ball on each lane more than any other professional that I know, based on what he sees. And by all means, Ryan knows all about the speed bump. We've talked about that in pretty full detail. So, it's trying, it's tough, but it's pretty awesome. And I mean, it's really great, Raymond, that you have somebody like Ryan right there in your hometown to kind of help the bowlers and the players, and being a person that is pretty open to helping others at all times. So the same thing here. I'm pretty sure most people around here know that I'm an open book. I'm here to help people, and knowledge is something we need to share, and something we need to learn from others, because no good teacher is only a teacher. They have to be good students as well. So again, for me, I'm a student every time I go and I compete, whether it's at a local level, whether it's league, whether it's a PBA event. You gotta take the takeaways. You gotta understand what you saw. You gotta process what you did right, process the things you did poorly. Otherwise, it's complacency, and you're never going to kind of take a step and understand what it's going to take to be better if you want to compete at the highest level. So but we definitely love talking about bowling. 58 minutes in here, guys. I've talked a ton. I really hope everybody enjoyed tonight's program, and if you have more questions that come up after the program is over, by all means, just like any other time. I get tons of messages after these feeds, or somebody that watched it a day later. I try to get to every single one of them that I can. And, if I don't get back to you right away, give me a little nudge. I will do my best to answer your question for you, because nothing more that I want to see than, the sport growing. So fire those questions away. But I am going to cut it off for tonight, gang. I enjoyed my time with everybody out there, and hopefully we can all continue to learn together. Going to try to possibly have Carrie throw some balls down the lane tomorrow night. We're going to try. I'm actually not going to be there, but I'm going to see if maybe she can get over there and throw the obsession tour down the lane, as we've been trying to get in there for you. But until next time, as always, before I sign off, make sure you support the proprietors, pro shops, snack bars, anything that has to do with bowling right now. We want to continue to grow the sport, by all means. For my fantastic sponsor, make sure you're buying Hammer bowling balls. They are definitely the best in the market. And until next time, everybody, tuning out for tonight, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.